The morning light spilled gently through the dusty windows of the small white church on the edge of Willow Creek, Texas. The sun glowed warm and golden against the old wooden pews, casting long shadows across the aisle that had been decorated with cheap white ribbons and a few tired flowers. Everything was ready. The altar candles were lit, the organist waited quietly, and the guests whispered among themselves in excitement and curiosity. But there was one thing missing. The groom. Clara Jones stood at the front, hands clutching a small bouquet of daisies she had picked herself that morning. Her wedding dress, simple and a size too small, pinched at her waist, but she didn't care. She had sewn it by hand, stitching each piece with trembling hope. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. Today was supposed to be the day everything changed, the day she stopped being the lonely girl who lived behind the diner, and became someone's wife. Someone's forever. Her mother wasn't there. She'd said it was too embarrassing, a fat girl in a wedding gown chasing a dream. Her friends had made excuses too. So it was mostly townsfolk, people who had come not out of love, but out of curiosity, to see if this unlikely wedding would actually happen. Minutes turned to half an hour. Then an hour. The whispers grew louder. Did he get lost? One woman murmured. I heard he ran off last night, another said, her tone sharp with pity. Poor thing, an old man sighed. Should have known. Boys like him don't marry girls like her. Clara heard every word. Each whisper stabbed through her like a blade, but she kept smiling, her lips trembling, her eyes locked on the church doors. Maybe he'd walk in late. Maybe his car broke down. Maybe love was real. But deep down, a small, honest voice inside her whispered the truth. He wasn't coming. The pastor, an old man with kind eyes and a wrinkled Bible, stepped closer. Miss Clara, would you like to wait a little longer? She looked at him, her throat tightening, but she refused to let tears fall. No, sir, she whispered. Her voice cracked slightly, but she steadied herself. I think we've waited enough. The guests began to shuffle, awkward and silent. Some stood, pretending to comfort her, others looked away, ashamed of their curiosity. The sound of the organ faded, and the only thing left was the quiet hum of the ceiling fan turning above. Clara looked down at her hands, still holding the bouquet. The flowers were wilting, petals falling one by one to the floor. She thought of all the nights she had spent dreaming of love, of someone looking at her like she mattered. But life had always been cruel that way. She wasn't the kind of girl men fought for. She wasn't the kind of girl anyone wrote songs about. Still, she smiled, a broken, gentle smile that came from somewhere deep in her heart. When she finally looked up, the pastor was still there, hesitant. I'm so sorry, child, he said softly. Clara shook her head. Don't be, sir. I should have known better. She looked around the small church, her voice growing steadier with each word. No one marries a fat girl, sir, but I can cook. The words hung in the air like smoke. A few guests gasped quietly. Some looked away. The pastor blinked, not knowing how to respond. But Clara wasn't bitter. She was tired, yes, but not angry. Her tone carried no hate, only a strange acceptance of how the world saw her. She took off her veil slowly, her fingers brushing the lace she had borrowed from a friend's wedding years ago. Her hair, slightly curled, framed her soft face as she turned toward the door. She walked down that long aisle, the hem of her dress dragging slightly, collecting dust. The sound of her steps echoed in the silence. Outside, the afternoon heat wrapped around her. The scent of wildflowers and dry earth filled the air. She stepped off the church steps and took a deep breath, the wind tugging gently at her veil as it slipped from her fingers and drifted away. It didn't matter. She was done waiting for people who didn't see her worth. Still, the pain was sharp. Every breath felt heavy in her chest. She thought about going home, taking off the dress, and pretending this day never happened. Maybe she'd cook something sweet. Pies always made her feel better. Maybe she'd take the job at the diner full-time. Maybe she'd forget what it felt like to dream. She sat on the small wooden bench near the church, bouquet resting beside her. The world around her was quiet except for the sound of cicadas and a few birds in the trees. The horizon stretched far and wide, endless fields under the golden Texas sun. She thought of all the things people had said about her over the years. How she was too heavy, too plain, too quiet. She had believed some of it, though she tried not to. She had built walls around herself made of kindness and humor, pretending their words didn't hurt. Now, sitting there alone in a white dress that had no meaning anymore, Clara felt small, but not defeated. She had survived worse. She straightened her shoulders, brushed a tear from her cheek, and whispered to herself, maybe I don't need saving. Maybe I just need to start over. As she looked out toward the dirt road that led away from the church, a small cloud of dust appeared in the distance, a truck, moving slow and steady. She didn't know it yet, but the man driving that truck was about to change her life forever. Inside the old Ford pickup was rancher Luke Carter, bringing milk to the church for a wedding reception that no longer needed it. He saw her sitting there in her wedding dress, alone, holding wilting flowers, and something in his chest tightened. He didn't know her name, but he saw her pain. He saw her strength. And in that quiet, sunlit moment, fate quietly shifted its course. Clara didn't look up right away. She just sat there, eyes on the horizon, unaware that her story wasn't over, it was only just beginning. The truck rolled slowly to a stop beside the old church, its engine humming softly before going silent. Luke Carter sat for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel, watching the woman in the white dress sitting alone on the bench. Her veil was gone, her flowers lay beside her, and her face, though streaked with faint lines of dried tears, held a quiet kind of strength that caught him off guard. He had seen heartbreak before, but never like this. There was something about her posture, the way she sat upright even in her sadness, that stirred something deep in him. He opened the door and stepped out, his boots crunching against the gravel. The afternoon heat was heavy, the air thick with the scent of dust and wild grass. Clara looked up at the sound, startled. For a moment, they just stared at each other, two strangers caught in the same quiet stretch of Texas sunlight. Luke removed his hat politely and nodded. "Afternoon, ma'am." Her lips twitched into a small, polite smile, the kind you give a stranger when your heart is too tired to offer more. "Afternoon, sir." He glanced at the church, at the ribbons fluttering in the breeze, the empty cars already driving away. "Didn't mean to interrupt," he said. "I was just bringing milk for the wedding." Her gaze dropped to the ground. "There won't be a wedding," she said softly. "Not today." Luke shifted his weight, the words hitting him harder than he expected. "I'm sorry to hear that." She tried to laugh, but it came out brittle and hollow. "Don't be. Seems everyone else saw it coming. I guess I was the only fool left who believed it." There was no bitterness in her tone, only sadness and a strange kind of calm. Luke didn't know what to say. He wasn't good with words, not the kind that fixed people. He was a man of work, of long days and quiet nights on the ranch. But something about her, about the way she spoke without trying to hide her hurt, made him want to stay, to offer something more than silence. He looked down at the milk crates in the back of his truck. "You said there won't be a wedding," he began carefully, "but I've got a cooler full of milk and no one to drink it. Maybe you'd like some. Fresh from the farm this morning." Clara blinked, surprised by the simple kindness. "You're offering me milk." Luke smiled a little. "It's all I've got to offer." Something in his tone, steady, honest, without pity, made her heart ease just a little. She nodded, and he poured some into a tin cup from the cooler. The milk was cold and sweet, and as she drank, the silence between them softened. "You run a farm?" she asked after a moment. "Ranch," he corrected with a small grin. "Cattle mostly, and trouble sometimes." She smiled faintly, setting the cup down beside her. "Sounds like a handful." "It is," he said. "And my hands ain't good in the kitchen either. I can fry an egg, maybe, if the pan behaves." That made her laugh, a real laugh this time, the kind that lit up her face. "So you can't cook?" "Not a lick," he admitted, shaking his head. "Every ranch hand I hire tries to help, but we end up eating beans and burned bread more often than not." "Sounds tragic," she teased lightly, a spark returning to her eyes. "It is," he said with mock seriousness. "We'd kill for a real meal." Her laughter softened into a quiet smile. "Well, I can cook," she said without thinking, and then her voice faltered as she realized what she'd said. "At least, that's what I'm good for. Or so I've been told." Luke looked at her, his brows furrowing slightly. "That don't sound like much of a compliment." She shrugged, looking down at her hands. "It's not. Just something people say when they don't know what else to say about me. I guess it's easier to tell a woman she can cook than to tell her she's beautiful." He didn't respond right away. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the faint sound of church bells from a far-off town. Finally, Luke spoke, his voice low and thoughtful. "I don't know about what other people see, but I think anyone who can hold herself together like you just did, that's beautiful enough." Her eyes flicked up to meet his, uncertain whether to believe him. But there was no flattery in his expression, no teasing smile, just quiet sincerity. It unsettled her, in a good way. He put his hat back on and nodded toward the horizon. "I could use a cook at the ranch. Someone who knows how to make food that don't taste like ash. If you ever feel like getting out of town for a while, there's a spot open." She blinked. "You're offering me a job?" "Just like that," he chuckled. "Just like that. You look like someone who could handle a bunch of hungry cowboys better than I can." She hesitated. "You don't even know me." Luke shrugged. "Maybe not, but I know pain when I see it. And I know work heals more than words sometimes." Clara's throat tightened. She wasn't used to kindness from strangers, especially men. Every kindness she'd ever received had come with a condition or a half-smile that said you should be grateful for this. But this was simple. Honest. No hidden meaning. She glanced back at the church one last time. The white ribbons fluttered weakly in the wind, like ghosts of a dream that had already faded. Maybe, she thought, it was time to stop waiting for someone to choose her, and start choosing something for herself. "I can make biscuits," she said quietly. "And pies, and roast chicken. Even stew, if you don't mind it a little thick." Luke grinned, eyes crinkling. "Miss, if you can make biscuits that don't taste like gravel, you've already got the job." Clara laughed softly, then stood up, smoothing the wrinkled fabric of her wedding dress. The sight of it made her pause. "I should probably change first," she murmured. "Take your time," Luke said. "Ranch'll still be there tomorrow." He tipped his hat politely and started toward his truck. "Wait," she called, her voice carrying across the still air. "What's your name?" He turned, smiling. "Luke Carter. Folks call me the rancher out by Willow Creek." She nodded slowly, committing it to memory. "I'm Clara Jones. Nice to meet you, Miss Jones," he said, then paused, his tone softening. "And for what it's worth, I think your groom's the fool here, not you." Her chest tightened again, this time not from pain but from something warmer, something like hope trying to find its way back into her heart. As Luke drove off, leaving a trail of dust down the old dirt road, Clara stood there for a long time, watching until the truck disappeared over the hill. The world around her felt a little different, still lonely, still quiet, but not quite as empty as before. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long while, she wanted to find out. Texas plains, spilling golden light across miles of pasture and fence line. The Carter Ranch stretched as far as Clara could see, rolling hills dotted with cattle, a weathered red barn, and a white farmhouse that stood like a quiet guardian against the horizon. It smelled of hay, fresh earth, and something wild and free. Clara arrived in a borrowed truck, wearing a faded blue dress and carrying a small suitcase. The air was still cool, the kind of morning that made her feel awake in a way she hadn't in years. She hadn't expected to come. When Luke had offered her the job, she thought she'd laugh it off, go home, and try to forget the humiliation of yesterday. But something about his eyes, the quiet steadiness in them, stayed with her. It wasn't pity, it was something else. Respect, maybe. When she pulled up, Luke was already outside, fixing a broken fence post. He turned as he heard the engine, wiped the sweat from his forehead, and smiled. "Morning, Miss Jones." She smiled back shyly. "You really meant it, then?" "About the job." He nodded. "Sure did. Kitchen's yours if you want it. The boys'll be grateful, trust me." Clara stepped out of the truck and looked around. "It's beautiful out here," she said softly. Luke looked out toward the fields, hands resting on his hips. "It's home. Bit lonely sometimes, but it's honest." She could feel that honesty in the air, the kind that came from early mornings, hard work, and the kind of silence that didn't demand anything from you. Inside the ranch house, the kitchen looked like a storm had passed through. Pots and pans were scattered everywhere, The sink was full of burned pans, and the smell of old beans lingered stubbornly in the air. Clara laughed softly as she took it all in. "Well, you weren't exaggerating," she said. Luke chuckled. "Told you we needed saving." She rolled up her sleeves and got to work without another word. Within an hour, the kitchen smelled different, like butter melting on the stove, biscuits baking in the oven, and coffee brewing strong. Luke watched from the doorway, trying not to stare, but it was hard. The way she moved, calm and sure, like she belonged there already, it did something to him. When the ranch hands came in for breakfast, their faces lit up. "Smells like heaven," one of them said, grabbing a chair. Clara smiled shyly as she set the table. "There's plenty for everyone. Don't be shy." They ate like they hadn't had real food in months, laughing between bites, praising her biscuits and gravy like it was the finest thing they'd ever tasted. Luke sat quietly at the end of the table, watching her smile, watching how easily she fit into the space that had felt empty for so long. After breakfast, Clara started cleaning the kitchen, humming softly under her breath. Luke leaned against the doorway. "You don't have to do all that right now," he said. She glanced over her shoulder. "If I don't, you'll just burn it all again tomorrow," she teased lightly. He smiled. "Fair enough." As the days turned into weeks, Clara settled into a rhythm. She woke before dawn, cooked breakfast for the ranch hands, packed lunches for the field, and prepared dinner that made even the toughest cowboys sit up straighter at the table. The house began to feel alive again, music on the radio, the clatter of dishes, the warmth of conversation. Luke started finding excuses to be near the kitchen. Sometimes he'd stop by to refill his coffee, sometimes just to ask how her day was going. He'd lean against the counter, pretending to read the newspaper while sneaking glances at her. Clara noticed, of course. She wasn't used to being noticed, and every time she caught him looking, her heart stumbled in her chest. But she didn't say anything. One afternoon, a thunderstorm rolled in suddenly. The sky darkened, and rain pounded against the tin roof. The ranch hands rushed to bring the cattle in, and Clara stood by the window, watching the storm with wide eyes. She'd always loved storms, the way the world went quiet between claps of thunder, the way rain washed everything clean. Luke came in, drenched and muddy, boots heavy with wet clay. "Cows are safe," he said, shaking his hat. "Coffee's on," she said, already pouring him a cup. He smiled gratefully, wrapping his hands around the mug. "You sure make this place feel different, Clara." She looked up, surprised. "Different how?" He thought for a moment, searching for the right words. "Warmer, I guess. Quieter, but in a good way. Used to be," this house just echoed. "Now it feels like home again." Her cheeks flushed, and she looked down at her hands. "I'm glad, Mr. Carter." He chuckled softly. "Luke. You can call me Luke." "All right," she said, a shy smile tugging at her lips. Luke. There was something tender in the way she said his name, something that made his heart beat faster. He didn't say anything, though. He just stood there, sipping his coffee, watching her as the rain fell against the windows. Over time, the small moments between them began to carry weight. When their hands brushed while passing a plate. When she laughed at one of his quiet jokes. When he walked her to her truck at the end of the day, lingering just a little longer before saying goodnight. The townspeople started talking, of course. That rancher's got himself a lady cook, they said. Probably just out of pity. But Luke didn't care what they said. And Clara, though the words still stung, found that they didn't cut as deep as they used to. Because when she was at the ranch, none of it mattered. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Luke found her sitting on the porch steps, watching the horizon. She had a cup of tea in her hands, the gentle steam curling into the air. He sat beside her, close enough to feel the warmth of her shoulder. "You like it here?" he asked quietly. She nodded. "I do. It's peaceful. Feels like the kind of place where a person can start over." He looked at her then, really looked at her, the soft curls falling loose around her face, the faint freckles on her cheeks, the quiet strength in her eyes. "You deserve that," he said. "A fresh start." She turned to meet his gaze. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was thick with something unspoken, something fragile and new. Then she smiled, small and real. "Thank you, Luke, for giving me a chance." He shook his head. "You don't owe me thanks. You're the one who gave this place its heart back." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of understanding, of warmth, of a connection neither of them could name yet. The crickets began to sing in the tall grass, and somewhere in the distance, a horse whinnied. The day faded into night, and for the first time in a long while, both of them felt like they weren't alone anymore. The late summer evening was painted in deep gold and soft pink, the kind of quiet that only existed on the ranch after a long day's work. The fields shimmered under the fading sunlight, the cows lowed lazily in the distance, and a light wind rustled through the tall grass. Clara stood on the porch, wiping her hands on her apron, the smell of baked cornbread and roasted chicken still drifting from the kitchen. The day had been long, but it ended the way she liked it, with everyone fed, the dishes cleaned, and the sun setting like a promise across the horizon. Luke had been out in the fields since dawn, fixing a broken water line, and now he was walking up the path toward the house. His shirt clung to his shoulders with sweat, and his hat hung loosely in his hand. When he saw Clara waiting on the porch, he smiled in that quiet way of his, half shy, half tired, but always sincere. "Smells like you worked your magic again," he said as he climbed the steps. "Dinner's ready if you're hungry," she replied, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Though I can't promise it'll be as fancy as those city restaurants." He laughed softly, setting his hat down. "You ever seen me eat in a city restaurant? I'd rather have your cooking any day." She looked down at that, hiding her smile. Compliments were still strange to her. She wasn't used to them, especially from men who meant what they said. They sat down on the porch steps together, a comfortable silence stretching between them. The cicadas were humming, and the first stars began to appear, glittering faintly above the open fields. "Beautiful night," Luke said after a while. "It is," she agreed, staring at the sky. "Feels like the whole world slows down when the sun sets." Luke glanced at her profile, the warm light touching her face. "It's peaceful," he murmured. "Just like you've made this place." She smiled faintly. "You keep saying that, because it's true," he replied simply. "Before you came, this house was just walls and dust. Now it feels like home." She looked away, her voice quiet. "You make it sound like I did something special. I just cook and clean, Luke." He shook his head. "You do more than that, Clara. You listen. You care. You've got a way of making people feel seen." Her throat tightened. No one had ever said something like that to her before. She wanted to thank him, but the words tangled in her chest. Instead, she busied herself by folding her apron in her lap. "You're kind to say that," she whispered. He turned slightly to face her. "Kind, maybe, but I ain't lying." The air between them grew still, heavy with something unspoken. Luke leaned back, resting his elbows on his knees. He wasn't the kind of man who talked much. His world was made of hard work and quiet understanding, but with Clara, words came easier. "You remember what you said the day I met you?" he asked suddenly. She frowned slightly. "I said a lot of foolish things that day. You said, 'No one marries a fat girl, sir, but I can cook.'" Her cheeks flushed instantly, and she looked away. "You remember that?" "I do," he said softly. "I remember how you said it. Not angry, not bitter, just tired. Like you believed it." She swallowed hard. "I did believe it. Still do, some days. People have a way of reminding me." Luke leaned forward, elbows on his knees, looking out toward the fields. His voice was low, steady. "Then maybe people don't know what they're talking about." Clara let out a small, humorless laugh. "You don't have to say that to make me feel better." "I ain't trying to," he said firmly. "You're strong, Clara. You've got more heart than most folks I've ever met. And if a man's too blind to see that, that's on him, not you." The way he said it, without hesitation, without pity, made something ache deep inside her chest. For so long, she had built herself around small pieces of acceptance, tiny moments of kindness. But Luke's words felt different. They didn't try to fix her. They simply saw her. The sky was darker now, the stars sharper. Fireflies blinked near the grass, their glow soft and flickering. Luke stood, brushing the dust from his jeans, and walked toward the railing. He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a small wildflower, yellow, delicate and slightly wilted. "Found this near the creek," he said, holding it out to her. She looked at it, surprised. "You brought me a flower." He shrugged, smiling faintly. "Didn't seem right to leave it there. Looks better with you." Her heart skipped. She reached out, her fingers brushing his as she took it. That single touch was enough to send warmth flooding through her. She didn't know how long she stared at the flower before whispering, "You shouldn't be so kind, Luke. People might start talking." "Let them talk," he said easily. "They talk anyway." She smiled at that, though her eyes were misty. "You don't understand. I've been the joke before. The girl no one dances with, the one everyone whispers about." Luke turned toward her, his expression gentle but firm. "Then they're fools, every last one of them. Because if they saw you the way I do, they'd stop laughing." Her breath caught. "The way you do?" she asked softly. He stepped closer, the porch boards creaking beneath his boots. "You think I haven't noticed?" he said, his voice rough with honesty. "You've been here for months, and every day this place feels better because you're in it. You cook, sure, but you also bring light into this old house. You make it warm again. I come in from the fields and the first thing I want is to hear your voice." She stared up at him, speechless. "Luke." He reached out, his hand trembling slightly as he lifted her chin. "You said no one marries a fat girl," he murmured. "Then I guess I'm not just any man." Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. For years, she had imagined love as something that happened to other people, beautiful, perfect people who didn't have to earn it. And now here it was, standing in front of her, quiet and sincere, wrapped in dust and calloused hands. She opened her mouth to speak, but he was already leaning closer. His lips brushed hers softly, tentatively, as though asking permission. It wasn't a desperate kiss. It was gentle, steady, full of the kind of love that didn't need to prove itself. When he pulled away, he stayed close enough for her to feel his breath. She closed her eyes, whispering, "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to," he said. "Just stay." The night settled around them like a blanket. Somewhere far off, thunder rumbled faintly, but the world felt still. Clara rested her head against his chest, her fingers still clutching the wildflower. She could hear the slow, even beat of his heart beneath her ear. For the first time, she wasn't thinking about what she wasn't, she was thinking about what she had found. And as Luke wrapped his arms around her, holding her close, she knew she'd finally stopped running from the girl she used to be. She had found a place, a person, a love that didn't ask her to be less. That night, under the wide Texas sky, Clara Jones stopped believing she was unworthy, and started believing she was home. Over Willow Creek Ranch, the light spilling across the open plains like liquid gold. The air smelled of wet grass and blooming sagebrush, and the sound of distant cattle drifted faintly through the stillness. Clara woke before sunrise, as she always did, her body still adjusting to the rhythm of ranch life. She sat on the edge of the bed, running her fingers through her hair, and for a moment just listened, to the wind, to the faint creak of the wooden floorboards, to the steady beat of her own heart. It had been 3 months since that day at the church. 3 months since she'd been left at the altar, humiliated in front of half the town. But strangely, she didn't feel broken anymore. The ranch had given her something she hadn't realized she was missing: peace. Out here, surrounded by wide fields and quiet mornings, no one whispered about her weight, no one looked at her with pity. The animals didn't care what she looked like, they only cared that she showed up. She had met Luke that day, the rancher who had pulled up in his truck just as she'd sat on the church steps, too numb to cry. He'd said only a few words then: "You look like you could use some coffee." Somehow, that was enough. He had taken her to the small diner in town, let her talk. Or rather, not talk, and when he learned she could cook, he offered her a job at the ranch. "Just until you figure out what's next," he'd said. But what came next was something neither of them had expected. Clara pulled on her worn boots, brushed off her apron, and headed toward the kitchen. The smell of fresh biscuits already filled the air. She'd been up since 5, kneading dough, frying bacon, preparing breakfast for the ranch hands who'd soon come stomping in from the fields. The kitchen had become her kingdom, her place of healing. The first time she'd cooked for the crew, they'd been skeptical. A new woman, quiet and soft-spoken, feeding 12 hungry men who worked from sunup to sundown. But the moment they tasted her biscuits, the room had gone silent. Then someone had said, with a full mouth and shining eyes, "Damn, Miss Clara, you just ruined every meal I've ever had before this." She'd laughed, and it had been the first real laugh she'd had in months. Now, mornings were her favorite part of the day. The men would come in dusty and loud, filling the room with laughter and noise. They treated her like family, teasing her gently, calling her Cookie, and always asking for seconds. Even Luke would join them sometimes, sitting quietly at the end of the table, his blue eyes watching her more than he realized. As the morning wore on, Clara stepped out onto the porch to shake the crumbs from her apron. The sun had climbed higher, painting the world in bright light. Luke was by the barn, fixing the latch on the gate. She watched him for a moment, his strong hands, the easy way he moved, the faint smile he wore when he saw her looking. "Morning, Clara," he called, straightening up. His voice carried that slow Texas drawl that always made her heart trip a little. "Morning, Luke," she said, smiling. "You're up early," he chuckled, wiping sweat from his brow. "Cows don't care what time it is. Neither do fences that won't stay shut." She laughed softly. "I've got coffee inside if you need a break." He gave her that look, the one that made her chest flutter. "You always know what a man needs before he says it." She blushed and turned away, pretending to fix her apron, but the warmth in her chest lingered. Later, they sat together on the porch steps, sipping coffee in comfortable silence. The land stretched out before them, endless fields of wildflowers swaying in the breeze. It was a view that had grown familiar to her, yet it still stole her breath. Every time, Luke spoke first. "You've changed this place, you know that." She glanced at him, surprised. "Me? Yeah," he said, staring out at the horizon. "Before you came, it was just work. Cows, fences, long days, longer nights. But since you've been here, it feels alive again." She looked down, embarrassed. "I just cook, Luke. It's nothing special." He turned to her then, his expression serious. "It is special. You've got a way of making everything feel like home." For a long moment, neither spoke. The air between them thickened with something unspoken, something that had been growing quietly since that first day. Clara's heart pounded in her chest, her hands trembling slightly around the coffee mug. She wanted to say something, anything, but the words caught in her throat. Luke looked at her gently, his eyes soft. "That man who left you at the altar, he was a fool." Her breath hitched. "You don't have to say that. I mean it," he said firmly. "He couldn't see what you're made of. The strength, the kindness, hell, the way you make this ranch feel like more than dirt and sweat." He smiled faintly. "If he couldn't see that, he didn't deserve you." Her eyes stung with tears she didn't want to shed. "You don't have to fix me, Luke." He shook his head. "I'm not trying to fix you, Clara. You're not broken." The words hit her harder than she expected. For years, she'd believed she was too much, too plain, too heavy, too everything. But sitting there beside him, in the golden morning light, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, seen. The ranch hand soon called Luke away, and the spell broke. He stood, tipping his hat with a small smile. "Don't work too hard, Cookie." She smiled back. "You either, rancher." As he walked away, Clara watched him go, her heart full of warmth and confusion. She had come here expecting nothing more than a job, a quiet place to forget her heartbreak. Instead, she had found belonging. That evening, when the sky turned orange and pink, Luke came back from the fields covered in dust. Clara was on the porch again, shelling peas into a bowl. He sat beside her without a word, watching her hands move. "Clara," he said softly after a while, "do you ever think about starting over?" She smiled faintly. "Every day." "What if starting over doesn't mean forgetting the past?" he asked. "What if it means building something better?" She looked at him, really looked at him this time, the man who had seen her at her lowest, who had never pitied her, who had given her a place to belong. Her heart raced as she whispered, "What are you saying, Luke?" He met her eyes. "I'm saying maybe no one married you that day because you weren't meant to marry the wrong man. Maybe you were meant to find your way here." The wind stirred the air between them, carrying the scent of fresh hay in summer. Neither moved for a long moment. Then Luke reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You're beautiful, Clara," he said simply. And this time, she didn't look away. For the first time, she believed it.